The sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the dusty roadside. In the small town of Willow Creek, where the horizon blurred into endless fields of golden wheat, a little girl named Lily stood behind her makeshift lemonade stand. She was no more than 7, her pigtails tied with faded ribbons, her dress dotted with lemon stains from the day's labors. Every afternoon, as the thunderous roar of engines approached, she'd wave frantically, her small hand cutting through the air like a beacon. The bikers, rough men and women etched by wind and road, would glance her way, some tipping helmets, others offering a gruff nod before accelerating past in a blur of chrome and leather. But on this sweltering July day, the wave turned desperate. Lily's stand, a rickety table pieced from old crates, had been her summer project, funded by her widowed mother's meager savings. She'd set it up right where the highway curved, hoping to catch travelers with her sign, Lemonade 50C, Smiles Free. Yet today, as the convoy of the Iron Vipers rolled by, their bikes gleaming under the relentless sun, a group of local thugs had decided it was easy pickings. They were teenagers from the wrong side of town, emboldened by boredom and cheap beer, their laughter sharp as they kicked over the pitcher, spilling sticky yellow rivers into the dirt. Lily's cries pierced the air, not just from the loss of her hard work, but from the shove that sent her tumbling into the gravel, her knee scraping raw against the stones. "Get lost, kid," one snarled, his friends snickering as they pocketed the few coins from her jar. She curled up, tears carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks, the world shrinking to the sting of betrayal and the acrid taste of fear. The lead biker, Ethan Hawk Harlan, felt the shift before he saw it. At 45, Hawk was a man forged in the fires of forgotten wars and broken oaths, his face a map of scars from a roadside bomb in some distant desert that had claimed his squad, and nearly his soul. He'd founded the Iron Vipers not for glory, but to honor a promise whispered in a hospital bed to his dying brother. "Watch out for the lost ones, Hawk. Be the shield they never had." The club had become his chosen family, a rumbling brotherhood of veterans, mechanics, and wanderers who rode for redemption, their cuts emblazoned with the viper coiled around a broken chain, a symbol of bonds that time couldn't sever. As the convoy crested the hill, Hawk's gut twisted at the sight, the overturned stand, the scattering teens, and Lily's tiny form huddled like a wounded bird. He'd seen her waving for months, that innocent gesture a rare spark in his shadowed life, reminding him of his own niece lost to illness years ago. "Hold up!" he barked into his helmet mic, his voice gravelly over the engine's growl. The signal rippled through the pack, 50 bikes in tight formation, their exhausts belching like dragons awakening. Tires screeched as they braked in unison, forming a wall of steel and resolve that blocked the road. The thugs froze, their bravado evaporating under the weight of leather-clad stairs. Hawk dismounted first, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached Lily with the caution of a man who'd learned trust was earned in drops. The air smelled of spilled citrus and hot rubber, the distant hum of cicadas underscoring the tension. "Hey, little one," he said softly, kneeling to her level, his massive frame somehow gentle. His eyes, hardened by loss, softened at her wide, tear-streaked gaze. "What happened here?" Lily sniffled, pointing a trembling finger at the fleeing shadows. They broke everything. Said I was in their way." Hawk's jaw tightened, but he didn't rage, not yet. Instead, he extended a calloused hand. "Name's Hawk. And you? You're the waving girl, right? Been seeing you light up the road like a sunrise." She nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve, a flicker of wonder breaking through her fear. "Lily, do you like lemonade?" The question hung innocent, pulling at the threads of Hawk's buried heart. Around them, the vipers fanned out, some checking the damage, others forming a perimeter with quiet authority. Big Mike, the club's burly enforcer and a former firefighter scarred by a warehouse blaze that took his partner, righted the table with a grunt. "We'll fix this, kiddo," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. Sarah, the only woman in the core crew, a nurse who'd patched up more than her share of road rash and regrets, knelt beside Lily, dabbing her knee with a clean bandana from her saddlebag. "There now, that's better. Brave girl like you doesn't let a little scrape stop her." The thugs, realizing their mistake, lingered at the roadside, muttering challenges that dissolved into uneasy shuffles. Hawk rose slowly, his presence a silent storm. "You boys think picking on a kid makes you men?" His words carried the weight of unspoken battles, the kind that left ghosts in your wake. One teen, the ringleader with a faded tattoo snaking up his arm, spat defiance. "Mind your own, old man. This ain't your town." But Hawk's gaze held him, unblinking, the desert wind whispering through the wheat like a warning. It is now, and we don't ride away from promises, even the small ones. What started as a stop turned into something deeper, a ripple in the fabric of their hardened lives. Lily's wave had been a quiet call, and in answering it, Hawk felt the stirrings of an old vow resurfacing, one that bound him not just to his brothers, but to the fragile threads of humanity they all guarded. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and regret, the Vipers worked in tandem, rebuilding the stand with spare wood from their toolkits, mixing fresh lemonade from a thermos Sarah always carried for long hauls. The scent of lemons mingled with the metallic tang of bike chains, a sensory bridge between their world of roaring freedom and Lily's simple dreams. By dusk, the stand stood taller, reinforced with Viper ingenuity, a metal brace here, a fresh coat of paint there. Lily beamed, handing out cups to the crew, her laughter bubbling like the fizz in her pitchers. "You all came back," she said to Hawk, hugging his leg fiercely. He ruffled her hair, the gesture awkward yet profound. "Promised ourselves we'd notice the good ones, kid. And you're the best kind of good." As the engines fired up again, the convoy idled, waiting for one last wave. But this time, Lily wasn't alone. Her mother, drawn by the commotion, watched from the porch with wide-eyed gratitude, the first crack in her weary isolation. Hawk mounted his bike, the vibration thrumming through his bones like a heartbeat, renewed. Little did he know, this act of quiet justice was the spark that would ignite a firestorm. Whispers of the thugs' connections, to a corrupt local sheriff who'd turned a blind eye to small-town cruelties, were already circulating among the Vipers. A promise, once awakened, demanded fulfillment. And as the taillights faded into the twilight, Hawk glanced back, the image of Lily's stand etched in his mind. A lemonade beacon against the gathering dark, reminding him that some rides weren't about the road, but the souls you carried with you. The desert night cooled quickly, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant vows. Hawk led the pack onward, the weight of the day settling into resolve. Back in Willow Creek, Lily waved one final time, her small hand a symbol of trust reborn. But shadows lingered, rumors of bigger threats, of a girl caught in webs far stickier than spilled sugar. The Iron Vipers had stopped once. They wouldn't hesitate to roar back if called. In the world of broken promises, this one was just beginning to bind them all. The moon climbed high over Willow Creek, its pale light filtering through the pines like a hesitant witness. Hawk's bike hummed softly in the club's makeshift garage on the outskirts of town, a converted barn where the air hung heavy with the scent of oil and aged leather. The Iron Vipers had pulled in after midnight, the day's adrenaline fading into a bone-deep weariness. Engines ticked as they cooled, and the faint crackle of a fire pit outside drew the crew together, shadows flickering across their faces like unspoken regrets. Hawk sat apart, nursing a black coffee from a dented mug, his gaze lost in the embers. The image of Lily's scraped knee and defiant smile clung to him, stirring memories he'd buried under layers of scar tissue. 20 years ago, in the scorched sands of a war zone that felt like another lifetime, he'd made a pact with his brother, Tommy. "If I don't make it, Hawk," Tommy had gasped, blood bubbling from his lips as the medevac chopper's rotors whipped the dust into frenzy. "Swear you'll look after the little ones, the ones who wave from the sidelines, thinking the world's got their back." Hawk had sworn it, his voice steady, even as his world cracked. Tommy didn't make it. The promise did, though, etched into the club's code like the viper on their patches. Big Mike lumbered over, his massive frame casting a long shadow. A former firefighter from the city's underbelly, Mike had joined the Vipers after a blaze that stole his best friend and left him with burns that twisted his left arm into a permanent salute. "That kid's got fire in her, Hawk," he said, settling onto a crate with a groan. "Reminds me of my sister's girl before, well, you know." He trailed off, poking the fire with a stick. The flames popped, sending sparks skyward like fleeting hopes. Hawk nodded, the coffee bitter on his tongue. "Yeah, but those punks weren't just bored. I saw the ink on the leader's arm, eagle with a badge, sheriff's deputy's mark, or close enough." The words hung heavy, drawing murmurs from the others. Sarah, wiping grease from her hands on a rag, leaned against her bike. She'd ridden with them for 5 years, ever since patching up a viper after a bar brawl and realizing the road offered more healing than hospital shifts. Her eyes, sharp as a switchblade, met Hawk's. "Heard whispers in town earlier. That sheriff, Harlan Tate, yeah, same last name as half the troublemakers around here, runs things loose, turns blind eyes for favors. If those kids are his, Lily's stand was just the start." The name Tate sent a chill through the group, colder than the night air. Hawk's jaw clenched. He'd crossed paths with men like Tate before, small-town kings who twisted badges into crowns. It reeked of the corruption he'd fled after the war, when a superior's greed left his unit exposed to that roadside blast. "We don't poke horns unless necessary," Hawk said finally, his voice low thunder. "But if they come back for her—" He didn't finish. The Vipers knew the rest. Loyalty wasn't a choice. It was the chain that held them together. Across town, in the dim glow of a single bulb, Lily lay awake in her small bedroom, the quilt pulled tight against imagined shadows. Her mother, Grace, sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. Grace was 32, worn thin by years of waitressing at the diner and scraping by after her husband's accident on the mill line, a fall that left him paralyzed and eventually gone. "Those men today, they fixed everything," Lily whispered, her voice small but steady. "The big one, Hawk. He said they'd notice the good ones." Grace forced a smile, though worry etched deeper lines around her eyes. "They did more than fix it, sweetie. But we can't rely on strangers." Yet, even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. Earlier, as the bikers rode off, she'd overheard the thugs muttering threats from the tree line. "Tell Mom we'll handle the kids' noise," and seen the glint of a patrol car idling too close. Grace had her own secrets, buried under bills and pride. A letter from years back, warning her ex-husband's family had eyes on Lily, claiming unpaid debts that twisted into custody grabs. She'd hidden it, but the vandalism felt like a prod, testing her resolve. Morning broke with a deceptive calm, the sun gilding the wheat fields in gold. Lily was back at her stand by 9, the reinforced table gleaming under fresh paint, a viper sticker discreetly affixed to the side like a talisman. Business trickled in, farmers tipping extra, kids from school waving shyly, but the air felt charged, like the hush before a storm. Hawk and a few Vipers had detoured through town on a supply run, their bikes a low rumble that turned heads. They stopped at the diner's edge, Hawk's eyes scanning the street. "Keep it light," he told Mike and Sarah as they grabbed coffees. "Just checking in." But fate, that relentless road dog, had other plans. As Lily poured a cup for an elderly rancher, the ringleader from yesterday sauntered up, flanked by two more, older, rougher, with the same eagle tattoos peeking from collars. "Cute setup, kid," the leader sneered, his breath sour with last night's regrets. "But playtime's over. Sheriff says this spot's for official use now. Pack it up or we will." Lily froze, her pitcher trembling, the lemonade sloshing like her rising fear. From across the street, Hawk saw it unfold, the boy's hand reaching for the table. Lily stepped back, his blood ignited, not with rage, but the cold fire of a promise reignited. "Mount up," he growled into his comms. The bikes roared to life, a symphony of defiance cutting through the morning quiet. They rolled in slow, deliberate, forming a semicircle that hemmed the thugs without a word. The leader whirled, bravado cracking. "What the? This ain't your fight, biker trash." Hawk dismounted, his boots deliberate on the pavement, the scent of hot asphalt rising like a challenge. "It is when it touches the good ones." His voice carried no threat, only the unyielding weight of honor. Sarah slipped to Lily's side, guiding her behind the stand with a reassuring squeeze. "We've got you. Brave girl." Mike loomed nearby, a silent mountain, while the other Vipers idled, engines purring like watchful guardians. The standoff stretched, tension coiling like a spring. The leader's phone buzzed, a quick glance, then a smirk. "Sheriff's on his way. You'll regret this." But Hawk didn't flinch. In his mind, Tommy's face flickered, the hospital promise echoing, "Watch out for the lost ones." As distant sirens wailed, growing nearer, Hawk knelt again to Lily's level, his scarred hand steadying hers. "Remember what I said? We notice, and we don't break our word." The patrol car crested the hill, lights flashing but sirens cutting short. A squat man in khaki stepped out, badge glinting falsely under the sun. Sheriff Tate, his face a mask of feigned authority, eyed the scene with calculating eyes. "Trouble here, boys," he called, but his gaze locked on Hawk, recognition sparking like a fuse. Whispers among the Vipers confirmed it. Tate had a history, ties to old grudges from Hawk's drifting days. This wasn't random. It was a thread pulling tighter, weaving Lily into a web of small-town rot. Grace arrived then, breathless from the diner, her face paling at the sight. "Lily, what's going on?" She rushed to her daughter, but Hawk's presence steadied her, an unexpected anchor. As Tate approached, barking orders to disperse, the air thickened with unspoken stakes. The Vipers held their ground, a wall of leather and loyalty. The lemonade stand at its heart, a fragile symbol now fortified by bonds forged in fire. Hawk met Tate's stare, the desert wind whispering through the fields like a gathering storm. One promise had brought them here, another was awakening, demanding they ride not just for Lily, but against the shadows threatening to swallow her light. The day was young, but the ride had only just begun, pulling them deeper into a moral crossroads where honor clashed with corruption, and redemption hung in the balance. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement of Route 17, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the edges of everything. Sheriff Harlan Tate stepped from his patrol car with the deliberate swagger of a man who owned the dust under his boots, his khaki uniform straining against a belly softened by years of unchecked power. His eyes, narrow and calculating like a coyote's, swept over the scene, the Iron Viper's bikes forming an unyielding semicircle, their engines idling with a low, predatory growl. Lily clutching her mother's skirt, wide-eyed but silent, and Hawk standing tall, his leather cut catching the light like weathered armor. The lemonade stand, that humble outpost of innocence, seemed smaller now, dwarfed by the gathering storm of wills. Tate's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if it isn't the road warriors playing hero," he drawled, his voice laced with the false drawl of small-town authority. He adjusted his hat, the badge on his chest glinting mockingly. "This here's my jurisdiction, son. You and your circus best roll out before I cite you for obstructing traffic." The thugs shifted behind him, emboldened by his presence, their smirks returning like weeds after rain. The ringleader crossed his arms, the eagle tattoo flexing on his forearm, a mark that now screamed affiliation rather than rebellion. Hawk didn't move, his stance rooted like an ancient oak against a gale. The wind carried the faint, sweet tang of lemonade mixed with the sharper bite of exhaust, a sensory reminder of why they were here. He'd faced worse than Tate in the war. Ambushes in moonless nights, superiors who sold out their own for a promotion. But this was personal, a corruption that preyed on the vulnerable, twisting promises into chains. "No obstruction, Sheriff," Hawk replied evenly, his gravelly tone cutting through the tension like a knife through fog. "Just making sure the good ones stay safe. You know, the ones who wave from the sidelines." Tate's gaze sharpened at the words, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. Recognition, perhaps, or the unease of a man whose secrets were being prodded. He glanced at Lily, then at Grace, who held her daughter close, her face a mask of quiet defiance, honed by years of scraping by. "Ma'am," Tate said, turning to her with feigned concern, "you got any trouble here? These boys say the kid's stand is in the way of official business." Grace's hands tightened on Lily's shoulders, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Official? This is her spot, Sheriff. She's done nothing wrong." Lily peeked out, her small voice piping up. "They broke it yesterday. The bikers fixed it. They're nice." The sheriff chuckled, a sound like grinding gravel, but Hawk caught the edge in it, the frustration of a plan unraveling. Sarah, ever the quiet sentinel, stepped forward slightly, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she placed a hand on Grace's arm. "We've seen enough small-town games to know when a family's being squeezed," she said softly, her words for Grace, but loud enough for all. Big Mike loomed at Hawk's side, his burned arm a silent testament to losses borne with Grace. His presence alone enough to make the thugs shuffle uneasily, Tate's patience frayed, his hand resting casually on his belt near the holster, a gesture meant to intimidate, but it only hardened the Viper's resolve. "Listen up!" he barked, his voice rising to carry over the idling engines. "This town runs on order, not outlaw fantasies. That stand. It's on county land now. Permits, taxes, things you leathernecks wouldn't understand. Pack it, or I'll have it towed, kid or no." The threat hung heavy, the air thickening with the unspoken. This wasn't about land. It was about control, about silencing the little lights that exposed the rot. Hawk's mind raced back to Tommy's hospital bed, the beeps of monitors and the coppery scent of blood mingling with the promise that had defined him. Watch out for the lost ones. Lily wasn't lost yet, but Tate's web was closing in. Debts from Grace's past husband, favors owed to the sheriff's cronies, all twisted into leverage. Hawk had overheard Grace murmuring to Sarah earlier, a slip about old letters demanding repayment, threats veiled as family obligations. It stank of the same greed that had cost him his squad, superiors pocketing bribes while soldiers paid the price. "No towing today." "Sheriff," Hawk said, his voice a low rumble that matched the bike's growl, "we're not leaving till we know she's square." The Vipers murmured agreement, a chorus of quiet loyalty that rippled through their ranks. One rider, a wiry veteran named Jacob with a limp from a chopper crash, revved his engine in solidarity, the sound echoing like a challenge. Tate's face reddened, his bluff called. He pulled out his radio, thumb hovering over the button. "Backup's 5 minutes out. You want a standoff? Fine, but remember, I make the rules here." Grace's breath caught, pulling Lily closer as the standoff stretched, the sun climbing higher and baking the tension into the asphalt. She hadn't asked for this, strangers riding in like knights from some faded story, but in Hawk's unyielding gaze, she saw a flicker of the protection her husband had once promised before the mill accident stole him away. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered to Hawk, her eyes searching his scarred face. He met her look, the weight of unspoken oaths in his expression. "Because someone did it for me once, and a promise like that, it doesn't fade." The radio crackled to life in Tate's hand, a dispatcher's voice cutting through. "Sheriff, we've got reports of a disturbance at the old mill site. Sounds urgent." Tate hesitated, his eyes darting to the horizon where dust clouds hinted at approaching vehicles. His own, or perhaps not. The thugs exchanged uneasy glances, the ringleader muttering, "This ain't worth it, Harlan." Tate shot him a glare that could curdle milk. But the moment's fracture was there, a crack in the facade. Hawk seized it, signaling subtly to his crew. "Time to ride smart," he murmured into his comms. The Vipers began to peel away slowly, not in retreat, but in calculated grace, their bikes forming a protective arc around the stand as they mounted up. Sarah lingered, pressing a small toolkit into Grace's hands. "For fixes down the line. And if you need us, wave. We'll see it." Lily waved tentatively, her smile breaking through like sunlight on water, but her eyes held a new wariness, the innocence tempered by the day's shadows. As the convoy rumbled to life, Hawk locked eyes with Tate one last time. The message clear, this wasn't over. The sheriff watched them go, his radio forgotten, the weight of his own broken vows pressing down. The favors to local bosses, the blind eyes to family ties that bound him tighter than any badge. Back at the stand, Grace knelt to Lily, the spilled drops of lemonade drying into sticky reminders. "They'll come back if we need them," she said, more to convince herself, but deep down she knew the threads were weaving tighter, pulling secrets from the past into the light. The Vipers thundered down the road, dust trailing like a comet's tail, but Hawk's thoughts lingered on Willow Creek. The sheriff's arrival had confirmed the rot. Now it was time to unearth it. Whispers among the crew spoke of old connections. Jacob knew a retired deputy who'd spilled tales of Tate's dealings. Debts funneled through the mill where Grace's husband had fallen. A promise awakened, demanded action, not just words. As the horizon swallowed the town, Hawk felt the familiar pull. Redemption wasn't a destination, but a ride through the dark, carrying the light for those who waved from the stands. Miles out, the pack pulled over at a roadside diner, the neon sign flickering like a hesitant beacon. Hawk dismounted, the gravel crunching underfoot as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the afternoon sky. Big Mike joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "That Tate's got skeletons. I saw it in his eyes. Guy like that doesn't bluff without backup." Sarah nodded, sipping water from her canteen, her face etched with concern. Grace mentioned something about custody papers, old family grudge, tied to the sheriff's circle. Lily's caught in it. Hawk exhaled slowly, the ember glowing like a vow rekindled. Tommy's words echoed again, a compass in the chaos. They wouldn't charge in blind. The Vipers rode with purpose, gathering intel like shadows before dawn. But the call was coming, a deeper intervention, one that would test their bonds and force Hawk to confront the Harlan name that haunted both sides. The road ahead twisted, promising clashes not of fists, but of truths long buried, where loyalty would forge or shatter the family they'd chosen. The afternoon sun slanted through the diner's grimy windows, casting elongated shadows across the checkered floor like fingers reaching for secrets. Hawk stubbed out his cigarette in a cracked ashtray, the acrid smoke lingering in the air alongside the greasy scent of frying onions and stale coffee. The Vipers had claimed a corner booth, their leather cuts draped over chairs, a temporary fortress amid the hum of truckers and locals nursing plates of pie. Outside, bikes lined up like silent sentinels, chrome glinting under the relentless light. Jacob slid into the seat across from Hawk, his limp barely noticeable after years of adapting to the road's unforgiving rhythm. A wiry man in his late 30s, Jacob had been a door gunner in the same war that scarred Hawk, his chopper downed in a hail of fire that left him with nightmares and a prosthetic knee hidden under his jeans. "Got a contact," he said quietly, sliding a worn napkin across the table scrawled with notes in blocky handwriting. "Old deputy name of Elias, retired last year after Tate pushed him out. Says the sheriff's been skimming from the Mills accident fund for a decade. Grace's husband? That fall wasn't just bad luck. Faulty rigging, ignored warnings. Tate's brother owned the place back then." Hawk's fingers tightened around his mug, the ceramic warm against his calluses. The pieces clicked like gears in a well-oiled machine. Debts twisted into threats, a custody ploy masked as family duty. Tommy's promise burned brighter in his chest. The lost ones, waving from the edges, needing shields against the wolves in uniforms. "And Lily?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that blended with the diner's murmur. Jacob leaned in, eyes shadowed. Elias heard Tate bragging at a poker game. Girls the leverage. Grace's ex had gambling ties to Tate's crew. Debts passed down like a curse. They want the stand gone to pressure her into signing over rights, clear the land for some backroom deal. Sarah, eavesdropping from the next booth with the map spread before her, looked up, her face paling. "That's not justice. That's theft. I've seen it in ERs, families torn apart by badges that bend." Big Mike grunted agreement, his massive hands folding into fists on the table, the scars on his arm twisting like vines. The weight settled over them, heavy as the desert heat pressing against the glass. Hawk pushed back from the table, the chair scraping like a warning. "We ride careful. No charges, no guns. Truth's our weapon." But as they mounted up, engines coughing to life in a chorus of resolve, Hawk felt the pull of the Harlan name, a coincidence too sharp to ignore. Tate's lineage traced back to the same dusty roots as his own, whispers of a shared grandfather who'd abandoned the family for greener pastures. Blood or not, corruption didn't discriminate. It poisoned everything it touched. Back in Willow Creek, the afternoon dragged under a sky turning bruise-purple with gathering clouds. Grace wiped down the lemonade stand with a rag, the citrus scent clinging to her skin like a fragile armor. Lily sat cross-legged on a stool, drawing pictures of bikes and vipers on scrap paper, her laughter a tentative melody against the wind's low moan. "Mommy, do you think Hawk will wave back next time?" she asked, crayon pausing mid-stroke. Grace forced a smile, her heart twisting at the innocence in those eyes, eyes that mirrored her late husband's, full of quiet dreams before the mill claimed him. She hadn't told the bikers everything, not yet. The letters started months ago, unsigned but reeking of Tate's influence. Demands for repayment on family loans, veiled threats about Lily's future if Grace didn't comply. The stand was her rebellion, a small stake in the ground. But now it felt like a target painted bright. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the wheat, a familiar patrol car slowed at the roadside. Not Tate this time, but one of his deputies, a lanky man with a moustache like a broom bristle, eyes darting nervously. "Evening, ma'am," he called, leaning out the window, his tone oily as spilled motor oil. "Sheriff sends regards, says if you reconsider that spot, things could smooth out, no more. Incidents." Grace's grip tightened on the rag, the fabric twisting in her hands. Lily looked up, sensing the shift, her drawing forgotten. "We like it here," Grace said firmly, stepping in front of her daughter. The deputy chuckled, but it rang hollow. "Suit yourself. Just remember, town's got rules." He drove off, tires crunching gravel, leaving a dust cloud that hung like a threat. Grace's resolve cracked then, tears pricking her eyes as she pulled Lily into a hug. The girl's small arms wrapped around her waist, an anchor in the storm. "The bikers promised," Lily whispered, as if words alone could summon them. Grace nodded, stroking her hair, the scent of lemons mingling with the earthy promise of rain. She didn't know if strangers could rewrite fate, but for the first time in years, hope flickered, not born of wishes, but of hands extended from the road. Dusk fell swiftly, the clouds thickening into a brooding canopy. Hawk's convoy crested the hill overlooking Willow Creek, the town's lights twinkling like hesitant stars. He detoured them through back roads, buying time to plan, but the sight of Grace locking up the stand alone twisted something deep in him. "Eyes sharp," he radioed, the static crackling like distant lightning. They rolled past without stopping, a ghost parade. But Sarah caught Grace's wave, a small, desperate gesture that pierced the twilight. That night in the club's barn, maps and notes spread across a workbench under a bare bulb, the Vipers pieced together the puzzle. Jacob's contact had more. Tate's safe at the station held the proof, forged documents tying the mill accident to covered bribes, Grace's name inked as collateral. "We get in quiet, and get out quieter," Hawk said, his finger tracing a route on the faded paper. Big Mike nodded, his voice a rumble. "For the kid, for all the ones we couldn't save." Sarah added her piece, a blueprint from a nurse friend who'd treated Tate's kin. Back entrance, no cameras after hours. But as midnight approached, a knock echoed through the barn, soft, insistent. Hawk opened the door to find Grace on the threshold, Lily asleep in her arms, a duffel at her feet. Rain pattered now, soaking her thin jacket, her face etched with exhaustion and resolve. I can't do this alone," she said, voice breaking like thunder in the distance. "They came back, said tomorrow's the end." Hawk stepped aside, the crew gathering like shadows drawn to light. Lily stirred, murmuring about waves and lemonade, her trust a quiet force that bound them tighter. In that moment, the promise expanded, not just Hawks to Tommy, but a shared oath among the broken and the brave. They welcomed her in, the barn's warmth chasing the chill, engines silent but souls revving for the fight ahead. Tate's web was unraveling, thread by thread, pulled by loyalty's unyielding grip. Dawn would bring confrontation, not with roar, but with the steady light of truths unearthed. Redemption riding in on the wings of a little girl's wave. If this chapter stirred something in you, the fire of loyalty or the ache of standing firm, hit that like button below. Your support keeps these stories rolling, reminding us all that promises still matter. Rain lashed against the barn's weathered tin roof, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the pounding hearts within. The Iron Viper's sanctuary, usually a haven of grease and growl, now hummed with a different rhythm. Whispers and the soft clink of mugs as the crew settled around a scarred wooden table. Flickering lantern light danced across faces etched by roads long travelled, casting shadows that softened the edges of their scars. Grace sat on a hay bale, Lily curled asleep in her lap, the girls' breaths steady like a quiet tide. The duffel bag slumped at Grace's feet, stuffed with essentials snatched in haste. A few clothes, Lily's drawings, and the crumpled letters that had driven her here. Hawk leaned against a workbench, arms crossed over his broad chest. The scent of damp leather mingling with the earthy tang of hay and motor oil. His eyes, shadowed by the brim of his faded cap, met Grace's across the dim space. "You did right coming," he said, his voice a low anchor in the storm outside. "Tate's not playing small anymore. Those letters, show us." Grace hesitated, her fingers trembling as she pulled one from the bag. The paper yellowed and creased like an old wound reopened. It spoke of debts inherited, of a family obligation to surrender custody unless the land cleared, veiled words that twisted her late husband's accident into a noose around Lily's future. Sarah took the letter gently, her nurse's hands steady as she scanned it under the lantern's glow. "This isn't law, it's leverage," she murmured, her voice laced with the quiet fury of one who'd mended too many lives fractured by power's abuse. She'd lost her own brother to a system that favored badges over truth, a traffic stop gone wrong, buried under reports that smelled of cover-up. Joining the Vipers had been her redemption, stitching wounds, not just of flesh but of spirit. Big Mike paced nearby, his heavy footsteps muffled by the rain-soaked floor, the burns on his arm itching under the humidity like a reminder of flames he couldn't outrun. "Mill accident was no accident," he rumbled, echoing Jacob's intel. "Tate's kin cut corners for profit. Grace's man paid the price." The crew gathered closer, a circle of resolve forged in the night's chill. Jacob unrolled the blueprint on the table, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. "Station's back door, unlocked after hours if you know the trick. Safes in the evidence room, combo from Elias. 4 to 729, dates from some old raid Tate botched." His voice carried the weight of his own ghosts. The chopper crash that had grounded him, leaving him to watch his crew fall from the sky. Hawk studied the lines, his mind tracing paths not just on paper, but through the moral maze ahead. Infiltrating a sheriff's office wasn't war, but it skirted the line. Truth as theft, justice as shadow work. Tommy's promise whispered in his ear, "Watch out for the lost ones." But what if upholding it meant bending the rules you'd sworn to live by? Grace shifted, Lily stirring slightly. A small hand clutching her mother's shirt. "I never wanted to drag you into this," she said, her voice cracking like thunder rolling distant. The rain outside intensified, sheets of it blurring the world beyond the barn's walls, isolating them in this fragile alliance. Hawk knelt before her, his knees protesting the years, bringing his gaze level with hers. The air between them hummed with unspoken vulnerabilities, his losses in the desert, her solitude after the mill. "Drag? Nah. We choose our rides, Grace. Lily waved us in. That's the call we answer." His words hung simple, profound, pulling at the threads of her isolation. For the first time, she saw him not as a stranger on chrome, but a man carrying his own broken promises like a shield. As the planning unfolded, tension coiled like a spring in the dim light. Mike sketched escape routes on a napkin, his pencil strokes bold and sure, while Sarah packed a med kit, just in case, her eyes flicking to Lily's peaceful form. "We'll go at first light," Hawk decided, folding the blueprint with care. "Quiet entry, grab the files on the mill and those custody papers. No confrontation unless cornered." But doubt flickered in Jacob's eyes, the wiry vet rubbing his knee absently. "Tate's got eyes everywhere. One wrong move, and we're the outlaws in his story." The words stirred the air, heavy with the ethical tightrope they walked. Loyalty versus the law, redemption versus ruin. Midnight deepened, the storm easing to a patter that lulled Lily into deeper sleep. Grace rocked her gently, the motion rhythmic as a bike's idle, her thoughts drifting to the stand under the open sky, now vulnerable without them. "Why you?" she asked Hawk softly, as the others stepped out to check the bikes. He paused, the lantern casting his scars in stark relief, silver lines mapping battles won and lost. "Had a brother once, made me swear to shield the small ones from the big shadows. Lost him to a blast that should have taken me, been riding that debt ever since." His confession hung raw, the barns quiet, amplifying the vulnerability. Grace reached out, her hand brushing his arm, a tentative bridge. "Sounds like the kind of promise that chooses you back." Dawn crept in, reluctant. Grey light seeping through cracks in the barn walls, chasing the night's shadows. The Vipers stirred, engines coaxed to life with muffled roars, the scent of fresh rain on metal sharp in the air. Lily woke to the hum, rubbing her eyes and blinking at the gathering crew. "Are we going home?" she asked, her voice small but bright, clutching a crayon drawing of a viper guarding a lemonade cup. Hawk ruffled her hair, the gesture tender as a vow renewed. "Soon, kid, we're making sure home stays yours." Grace bundled her into the duffel-warmed corner, her face set with newfound steel, the weight of their chosen family lightening her load. They rode out in pairs, low profiles blending with the misty roads, Hawk and Jacob leading toward Willow Creek's outskirts. The town slumbered under the lifting fog, the station a squat brick building hunkered like a wary beast. As they approached on foot, hearts pounding in sync with the distant drip of eaves, Hawk felt the promise swell. To Tommy, to Lily, to the fragile honor that bound them, the back door loomed unmarked and unassuming, but beyond it waited truths that could shatter Tate's empire or drag them into the abyss. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the must of old files and fluorescent hum. They moved like ghosts, boots silent on linoleum, Jacob's limp a faint whisper. The evidence room door yielded to a gentle twist, the safe's dial clicking under Hawk's steady fingers, 4729. It swung open with a soft groan, revealing stacks of papers yellowed by time. There, the mill reports, redacted but damning, signatures linking Tate's brother to the faulty rigging. And the custody files, forged edges glaring under their flashlight beam. Debts inflated, threats inked as agreements. But as Hawk pocketed the documents, a floorboard creaked in the hall, footsteps, deliberate, closing in. Jacob froze, his hand on Hawk's shoulder, the air electric with peril. Outside, the first rays pierced the fog, illuminating the station's front where Tate's car pulled up, unexpected and early. The sheriff stepped out, coffee in hand, his eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar bikes hidden in the tree line. The web tightened, confrontation inevitable, as loyalty's fire met corruption's cold grasp. Hawk signaled retreat, papers clutched like lifelines, but the door's hinge squeaked, a betrayal in the silence. They burst into the morning light, hearts racing, the documents burning against Hawk's chest. Tate whirled at the sound, his face twisting from surprise to rage. "You sons of—" But the Vipers were already mounting, engines roaring to life in a defiant symphony. Grace and Lily, waiting in the barn's shadow miles away, heard the distant thunder, hope and fear mingling like the dew on the fields. The ride back would be swift, but the truths unearthed demanded a reckoning, one that would test every bond, forging redemption from the ashes of old promises kept. The morning mist clung to Willow Creek like a shroud, muting the first golden rays that sliced through the pines. Engines thundered to life outside the sheriff's station, a raw symphony of defiance cutting the fog as the iron Vipers peeled away from the brick facade. Hawk gripped the handlebars of his bike, the stolen documents tucked securely inside his leather vest, their edges pressing against his ribs like a heartbeat of buried truths. Jacob rode shotgun beside him, his face set in grim determination, the limp forgotten in the adrenaline surge. Behind them, Big Mike and Sarah formed the rear guard, their bikes weaving through the narrow streets with the precision of a pack honed by years on the edge. Sheriff Tate burst from the station door, his coffee mug shattering on the pavement in a spray of dark liquid that steamed against the cool air. "Stop! That's theft! Federal offense!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with the fury of a man whose empire teetered. He fumbled for his radio, but the convoy was already accelerating, tires biting into the damp asphalt with a screech that echoed off the waking town. Dust and mist swirled in their wake, a veil that blurred the line between escape and pursuit. Tate's patrol car roared to life seconds later, lights flashing erratically, siren wailing like a wounded beast. But the Vipers knew these roads, the hidden curves of Route 17, the back trails snaking through wheat fields where the sheriff's bulkier vehicle would falter. Hawk's mind raced faster than the wind whipping his face, the scent of wet earth and exhaust filling his lungs. Tommy's promise anchored him, shield the lost ones, not with fists or fury, but with the unyielding light of truth. These papers weren't just ink on yellowed sheets. They were lifelines for Grace and Lily, exposing the mill's rigged beams, the bribes that silenced witnesses, and the forged custody claims twisted from old gambling debts. Tate's web had ensnared her late husband, turning tragedy into leverage. But now it unraveled in Hawk's hands, a moral blade sharper than any blade of steel. The chase unfolded like a fever dream, the patrol car's growl fading as the bikes darted onto a gravel side road, pebbles pinging off fenders like scattered accusations. Tate radioed for backup, his voice frantic over the static, but Willow Creek's underbelly was thin. Deputies loyal to him were scattered, hungover from the night. The Vipers crested a rise, the town shrinking below like a faded photograph, and Hawk signaled a split. Half the crew veering east to draw pursuit. The core group, him, Jacob, Mike, and Sarah, doubling back toward the barn through the fog-shrouded fields. The air hummed with tension, the distant wail of sirens a fading echo. But Hawk felt the weight of what they'd ignited. This wasn't victory yet, it was the spark of reckoning, where loyalty clashed with corruption in the quiet dawn. Miles away, in the barn's shadowed embrace, Grace paced the hay-strewn floor, her arms wrapped tight around herself against the chill that seeped through the walls. Lily sat nearby, legs dangling from a crate, her small fingers tracing the Viper emblem on a borrowed patch Sarah had given her. The girl's eyes, wide with a mix of wonder and worry, flicked to the door every time thunder rumbled, not from the clearing sky, but from the engines drawing near. "They're coming back, Mommy," Lily said, her voice a thread of certainty weaving through Grace's doubt. The scent of cooling rain lingered, mixing with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee brewing on a hot plate, a small ritual of normalcy in the storm. Grace knelt beside her, brushing a stray curl from Lily's forehead, her own face lined with the exhaustion of secrets finally shared. "I know, sweetie. They promised." The word hung between them, heavy with the power of oaths she'd once dismissed as road-weary tales. In the dim light filtering through cracks, she saw Lily's stand in her mind's eye, reinforced by calloused hands, a beacon of simple joy now fortified by strangers' honor. The letters, those venomous missives from Tate's shadows, lay scattered on the table like defeated foes, their threats hollow without the backing files. Grace's heart swelled with a fragile hope, born not of naivety but of the chosen family unfolding before her. Rough voices, planning in the night, gentle touches, mending scrapes, a brotherhood that rode for the waves they couldn't ignore. The barn door creaked open just as the first bikes growled into the yard, mud-splattered and triumphant. Hawk dismounted first, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The documents extended like a hard-won trophy. "It's done," he said, his gravelly tone laced with quiet relief as the crew piled in, shaking off the mist like wolves returning to den. Jacob slumped against a beam, catching his breath, while Mike bolted the door with a resounding thud. Sarah checked them over swiftly, her hands efficient, confirming no signs of pursuit clinging to their leathers. Grace rose, taking the papers with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the damning lines under the lantern's warm glow. The mill report detailed the sabotage, beams weakened for cost-cutting, Tate's signature buried in approvals. The custody forgery unraveled there too, debts inflated to justify the grab, all tied to the sheriff's kin. This clears everything," she whispered, tears carving clean paths down her dust-streaked cheeks. Lily hopped down, hugging Hawk's leg with unbridled joy. "You brought the truth, like in my stories." He chuckled softly, the sound rumbling deep, ruffling her hair as the weight of Tommy's vow settled into peace. But the morning wasn't without its shadows. Word spread fast in Willow Creek. By noon, Tate's car idled outside the station, his face ashen as deputies. Elias among them, now emboldened, confronted him with the leaks. No raid came for the Vipers. Instead, whispers of internal probes rippled through the town, the sheriff's badge tarnished by the light of exposed rot. Grace and Lily returned to the stand that afternoon, the sun breaking fully now, gilding the wheat in waves of gold. The table stood proud, cups filled and ready, Lily's wave drawing not just travelers but neighbors, drawn by tales of the riders who upheld the small against the mighty. Hawk watched from afar, the convoy idling on the hill, engines a soft purr of farewell. Sarah smiled at the sight, her voice soft over the comms. "We did good, boss. For the lost ones." Big Mike nodded. His massive frame relaxed for the first time in days. Jacob lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke that curled toward the sky like released burdens. Hawk felt the road calling again, but lighter now, the promise fulfilled in Lily's laughter echoing across the fields. Redemption wasn't a single ride, it was the chain of choices, binding the scarred to the innocent, honor to the horizon. As the Vipers rolled out, taillights fading into the endless blue, Lily waved one last time, her small hand an eternal beacon. In Willow Creek, the air smelled of fresh lemons and new beginnings, the shadows receding under the sun's unyielding gaze. Promises kept wove the strongest threads, turning strangers into family and waves into legacies that outlasted the dust. If this tale of quiet courage and unbreakable bonds touched your heart, thank you for riding along. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories of redemption on the road. We'd love to have you in the convoy.